So welcome everyone to the second meeting of the day. Hopefully it will be the, no one has a meeting after this. It's the GDE Subcommittee. Mali, do you want to share your screen?
Yes.
So this is meeting 1 of 2, and today will be a very exciting meeting. So we will start, Mali will provide a quick recap for the folks who did not attend the last meeting, just kind of what we talked about fairly quickly, and some clarification on a couple questions that kind of arose in that meeting. And then we would have 2 exciting presentations from Peter Windram and Sarah Ryan talking about the Hitch. So we're all excited to kind of learn more from their experience and ongoing effort to preserve and protect the Hitch. Mali, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. Good afternoon, everyone. So just as Ibrahim mentioned, I'm going to quickly review what we did for the last meeting, the first meeting of the GDE's identification, and some of the important discussion point that we had during the meeting. So in that meeting, we reviewed some of the Sigma requirements to identify the GDEs. Based on Sigma requirements, any GSP plan should consider the beneficial uses and users of groundwater and describe the potential adverse impacts that any sustainability plan could have on those beneficial users. According to the definitions that Sigma provides for groundwater dependent ecosystems, which is the ecological communities or animal species that depend on groundwater, GDEs are considered as beneficial users of groundwater. Therefore, based on the Sigma requirements, we, as the responsible parties to develop the GSP plans or all the GSAs, are required to first identify the groundwater dependent ecosystems, and secondly, describe the potential adverse impacts that the GSPs could have on the GDEs. And to do that, Sigma suggests us, based on the sentence that I'm pointing out to here, to utilize the data that are available from the Department of Water Resources. So in that meeting, we described the approach that we followed, which was basically to confirm that the approach was consistent with the guidance given by DWR, TNC, and CDFW, and we introduced the database that we used to initiate our GDE identification for the Big Valley Basin. Here I have put a screenshot of the Groundwater Resources Hub that has a tool which shows the location of springs, wetlands, vegetation, or any indicators of the GDEs for different locations across the California. As you can see here, the TNC partnered with Department of Water Resources and CDFW to compile the information and this database here. One of the questions that was asked during the previous meeting was about the level of engagement from the publics to confirm the data in this database. So in the documentation of the database, it says that the data were collected based on data from 48 state, federal, and local agencies, and they were reviewed by interested parties in the local agencies, academia, and experts in the field. I am not so sure about the level of that engagement though. So if any of you have more specific questions in that respect, I think Department of Water Resources is the best reference to reach out to, or even if you have any feedback to provide regarding to the identification process. There's also another question about the public engagement in our effort for identifying the GDEs or any other effort in the developing the GSP for the Big Valley Basin, and that is happening through the GSPAC meetings, communication, and the GSP development process. We don't have anything going on outside these efforts here. So, like I said, we developed the process, and as a starting point, we use the database that I just described to you. We developed the initial draft, which was distributed among the GSPAC members. Then we received some useful comments from the members, and we added some of the items that were pointed out to in those comments, and we followed the criteria, some of the questions to prepare the final draft for potential GDEs. There were some questions that we needed to ask to be able to conclude whether any identified item there was qualified to be considered as GDEs or not. And if in any case the answer to those questions was inconclusive, following the TNC guidance, we just decided to assume it's a GDE until we collect more data down the road, and then we can always come back and revise the assumption, whether accept it's a GDE or reject the initial idea. Here you see the map that I shared in the previous meeting, which kind of like contains the features identified by the TNC database, and the NCAG here stands for Natural Communities Commonly Associated with Groundwater, and it identifies two features. One, wetland features, the dark blue line on the map, which are mostly along the tributaries to Clear Lake, and the other one are the vegetation features. One is the riparian mixed hardwood along the Kelsey Creek. Here you see in green, and the Fremont cottonwood, the purple color, which is above the Adobe Creek. We also added in the revised version two other features. One is the native oak, the pink color here along the Mago Slough, and Hitch, which is going to be the focus, the most focus of today's meeting. One important discussion that we had last in August 19th, the previous meeting, was about the wetland features that were identified by the NCAG dataset as potential GDEs. So, like I showed to you, as part of the process and the evaluation criteria that we developed, we needed to assess whether any of the identified items relied on surface water or groundwater resources. We initially thought that what TNC identified as wetlands seemed to be more relying on the surface waters. And even when we had a field visit back in July, there we didn't find any evidence of these wetlands. And we actually thought that they were riparian habitats and probably misidentified by TNC dataset. So in that meeting and in all the available drafts that you have for the GDE's identification, we recommended to not consider wetlands as GDEs. But during the meeting, we had the conversation with folks, and we received this suggestion that since there is a bit of uncertainty in terms of relying on groundwater or surface water, we just assume that they are potential GDEs for now, and just like any other uncertainty in the identification process, we can revise that after the data gap is filled in the future. So in the updated version that you will see in future, you will see that the wetlands are moved to the list of potential GDEs of the Big Valley Basin. But now we recommend one other change to be incorporated. So changing the designation from wetland to riparian habitats is most consistent with our field observations. And we wanted to see if you agree with this change, because we think this is what makes most sense. But one thing to remember about all of these habitats shown here is that the identified GDEs, all of them are very close to surface water if you look at the map, and I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with the area. So there could be this argument that all of them rely on surface water, at least for a part of the year. But this is all we can say. No other conclusion about them. There's still possibilities that all of them are also rely on groundwater here. And finally, in that meeting, we looked at some of the health criteria for the GDEs. We looked at the extent and spread of the GDEs, and also shared with folks some of the analysis results that we used following two vegetation health index. One was about the greenness of the vegetation, or the NDVI, and the other index was about the moisture content of the vegetation, which was called the NDMI. Both analyses showed little to no changes for the two GDEs that were initially identified by the TNC. We didn't have any data to do that analysis for the native oak along the Mago Slough, and that's why we can't say anything about them. But the one along Kelsey Creek and the one above the Adobe Creek seem to have been in a good health since 1985, because we use the data from that time period. And for now, our focus will be mostly on the project and management actions, which could cover any range from monitoring and data collection to education and outreach, demand management, water supply augmentation, funding, or any other potential project that can come to your mind. And as Ibrahim introduced in this morning meeting, you can contribute to that spreadsheet and let us know what you think is best able to help us to do the management actions in this respect. Yep, I'm done.
Thanks, Melly. There is a couple questions on the chat. Let me see those. So Sarah Ryan is saying that she wasn't aware of the tribe involvement, of any tribe's involvement in the development of the NCAC data set. I'm not sure if anyone from DWR is on the call, but that's something I think we could kind of forward that question and see if there was any tribal outreach from DWR or TNC. And then Bethany was asking about the riparian habitat designation should be extended along all tributaries. So you're commenting on the map, Bethany?
Yeah, it seems to me like the data set is picking up some signatures, I guess, of vegetation is how it was probably developed based on imagery. But if we're talking about riparian habitat, it seems to me that it should extend along all of the tributaries because they would all be riparian.
You mean these pieces here that is excluded here along Metcow Creek and Adobe Creek?
Yes, yes. So
okay.
it sounds like you're saying that the NCAAG database incorrectly attributed those blue areas, the dark blue areas, as wetlands, and suggesting to change the name to riparian habitats. And what I'm suggesting is that it also, you know, is excluding other riparian habitat along the tributaries, the areas like you pointed out where it's discontinuous.
Here you mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We can, yeah, we'll take a look at that. Any question to Mali before we turn this over to Peter? Okay. Peter, it's all yours.
Okay. Sorry, just a moment. We'll get the right one up here. Sorry, this is always. There we go. Hello, everybody. Let me get your, thank
I think you froze, Peter.
Yes. I'm sorry.
You froze on my screen. I'm not sure if others experienced that or not, but
All right. Please keep me posted on that because occasionally I get the notice that the connection's a little shaky.
sure.
Thank
And-
you.
And I guess on your screen, we're seeing, I guess, slide 3. Is that what we're supposed to be looking at?
Slide number 2. My background, are you seeing that on the, let's see.
You might, I don't know if you have 2 screens, but
Let me get that straightened out.
okay.
Okay. Always, I just break out in a cold sweat when I start working with these.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, this picture doesn't want to get displayed.
Perfect. Yep. That sounds
Okay.
good. Yep, that sounds good. And if we have issues with sort of using your visual and microphone, you can always send the slide deck to one of us and we can lead it, and you can just,
Okay,
that's an option.
well,
But we'll go with it
okay,
for now.
a little bit of, as I say, about my background. Living on Kelsey Creek, my family's been here for multiple generations. And I say that with considerable humility because my friends and acquaintances in the Native American community cite thousands of years of ancestry. So my family is one of the early Euro-Americans to arrive, but pales by comparison to others, but we do share a concern for the Clear Lake Hitch. I farm vineyards and pastures on Kelsey Creek and have done so from 1971 until the present. I have and drawn water both directly from Kelsey Creek up until about 10 years ago, and then also, of course, pump groundwater. I've been president of the Chi Council for the Clear Lake Hitch since 2004. In 2004, a couple of friends and I got very concerned about this condition and status of the Clear Lake Hitch because as a child, pardon me, I saw them by the tens of thousands in the creek, played with them, chased them, did all the things that local boys do with hitch, some of which is not too admirable. But I love them and fascinated by them, and I became very concerned about their welfare. So we got together through a local chapter of the Sierra Club and started monitoring the hitch. And very quickly, the Lake County Resource Conservation District stepped forward and said, we want to form a CRIMP, Coordinated Resource Managing Program for the Clear Lake Hitch. So the Chi Council for the Clear Lake Hitch was formed. Chi, by the way, is one of the Native American names for this fish used by the members of tribes on this side of the lake. Hitch used, or a version of it used by tribes on the north side. The Chi Council is dedicated to the study and preservation of the Clear Lake Hitch. Stakeholders included local, state, and federal agencies, tribes, environmental groups, citizens. And we sponsored annual volunteer surveys of spawning hitch on all major tributaries to Clear Lake. Over 2,500 reported observations have been made since 2004. The monitoring technique was disciplined. The procedure is to go to a bridge, and as an individual goes to a bridge, looks over the bridge one side, and if they see hitch or not, if they're hitched, they do an estimate of the number, go to the other side of the bridge, downstream side, do the same, and record it. But equally important, they record no hitch seen. And so we were able to gather sound data regarding where hitch were seen in the creeks and in all the tributaries of Clear Lake. And by so doing, we were able to ascertain a pattern over the years in which fewer hitch were being seen in a number of streams, and occasionally, and not uncommonly, no hitch in some streams, including Kelsey Creek, as you'll see in a moment. We conducted monthly meetings for up until basically up until COVID, and shortly below that, and those have all been halted. The Lake County, we've maintained a website for years, but that website has now gone dark because the person who sustained that has retired. It's now being that data is transferred over the Clear Lake environmental resource organization, and will be recompiled. All of the data is posted on the website. It's been public, is always public, every aspect of it. So anyway, just a bit of background. My picture that can't be displayed is a beautiful picture of hitch swimming upstream to spawn. When we get that fixed, we'll do it just fine. Some basic hitch facts. Hitch are members of the minnow family. Females grow up to about 13 inches long. Males are shorter, smaller, about 8 to 10 inches. They spawn in the tributaries to Clear Lake and to an unknown degree in Clear Lake itself. Something we didn't know when we started all of this. We understood it was just entirely spawning in the creeks, but that's not the case. Female eggs number to 60,000 per female, and with as many as 122,000 counted in one female many years ago. The hitch come up the stream. Their eggs are deposited in gravel. They very quickly expand and lock into the rocks. In 5 to 10 days, the embryos hatch, and 5 to 10 days after the hatch, the embryos begin to swim freely and do so down to the lake. Historically, the numbers of hitch were vast, absolutely vast. Early settlers described occasions in which you couldn't ride a horse across the back of the creek without stepping on hitch. And there are times that I have seen hitch in some locations as being as dense as that. There's been a significant decline in the population to the present, especially since the 1970s. Conditions affecting the survival of the Clear Lake hitch, and this is important because we're going to put this in context with what we're otherwise discussing today. In Clear Lake, the identified impacts on the hitch are the loss of wetlands for juvenile hitch rearing. Dr. Peter Moyle, the foremost freshwater authority in California, bar none, professor at University of Davis, in conversation and in writing, describes that as the single biggest issue. Namely, these little hitch, after spawning, come down and go into the tules where they reside until they're about 2 inches in length, and then they go out to the middle of the lake where the hitch school and reside, the adults do, through all the remainder of the year until it comes around to spawning time again. Adult hitch live on plankton, and which leads us to the impacts of introduced non-native fish species. Silversides and threadfin shad are two species of fish that have been introduced. Silversides are very small. The little silver guys, I don't know, 2 inches long, maybe a little longer, and introduced to control the Clear Lake gnat, which was a nuisance gnat that boiled up or made life really tough on tourists in the summertime. And then the threadfin shad were introduced as a bait species to feed the largemouth bass. Largemouth bass had major impacts on the hitch, both predation of the hitch. When the hitch school at the mouths of the streams prior to coming up to spawn so too do the bass, although they don't school, they lie in ambush and they attack the hitch. And one of the effects also is simply disrupting the hitch. With the I'll comment on that at the end of this presentation. There are also physical barriers to the spawning grounds. The detention structure, which you all saw, is an impediment, even though there's a fish ladder there of sorts, and some fish are able to get through. They back up below that detention structure by the thousands in a good year. Also, the footings at the Main Street Bridge, as you also saw, is an absolute barrier to hitch, and it deprives the hitch of miles and miles of historic spawning grounds. Degradation of the spawning beds is also a big. The spawning beds are, in other words, the quality of the gravel and extent of it. Above the Main Street Bridge, much of the gravel has been stripped out of the creeks and clear up past our place. I'll show you where we live up here, and exposing the clay liner to the creek. Sections of it remind me of aqueducts, or I don't know, ditches or streams in Los Angeles. I mean, it looks like concrete in some places. So anyway, all of these are impacts on the Clear Lake Hitch that one needs to keep in mind. So the question that's presented to us today that I wish to address is, does groundwater pumping for frost protection in Big Valley reduce stream flow in Kelsey Creek during the hitch spawning runs? Just once again, does groundwater pumping for frost protection in Big Valley reduce stream flow in Kelsey Creek during the hitch spawning runs? To kind of just orient us a little bit, you've seen versions of this. I'm sorry, it seems like it's kind of a tough scale, but the blue line is Kelsey Creek. The yellow line is Highway 29. The town of Kelseyville is right here. I don't know, are you seeing my cursor too, guys? Do you?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, that's the town of Kelseyville. The Main Street Bridge is right here. All right. Going upstream, following upstream, this is the USGS gauge in the canyon here. Coming downstream is where my wife and I live. This is a 40-acre piece of property. We've lived here since 1976. We've had vineyards and irrigated pasture on this property. About 10 years ago, we took the vineyards out for a number of reasons, but one of the significant ones had to do with reduced flows of water in the creek, because we pump directly from the creek, both for frost protection and irrigation by drip irrigation of that vineyard. We also, on this property, had irrigated permanent pasture that similarly has not made it feasible to raise it. What we have now are dry fields where horses graze. Coming on down the creek, further we get to the Main Street Bridge. This, again, the characteristic of this creek is that there undoubtedly is some groundwater percolation off to the sides, but fundamentally it's a ditch. Uses in this area from on down, this is a canyon location. The creek comes on down. There's no farming in this area, no irrigation till you get to our place where there used to be irrigation, is not now. There's you come on down, that green spot is a walnut orchard. It's the only one along the creek. There's residences strung along the creek, Kelsey Creek, which runs along the edge of this creek. Going a little further upstream, there are residences as well in the little valley that's up here, and there's a lot of tremendous amount of cannabis growing that's exploding as of this year. Don't know what the impacts of that are going to be on stream flows. Below the Main Street Bridge, which is here, you get on down. This is our other piece of property here, where we have vineyards and a sizable portion of that beautiful cottonwood riparian forest is right on here. Here's the detention structure that you all have seen, and then down below it is the DWR gauge. Distance from the Main Street Bridge to the gauge is at 1.5 miles. That's from here down to the gauge. Distance from the USGS gauge is 4 miles to the Main Street Bridge. Sources and demands on Kelsey Creek above Main Street Bridge. This is relevant to this whole issue about the amount of water available for recharge and for surface flows. The principal sources of water are winter rainfall runoff from the surrounding hills. The floodwaters in Kelsey Creek are just awesome when the high rains occur. I mean, we stand there and watch it, and it's enormous. Right up here where I just pointed out our home is, the water runs year round through the creek. It's a great playing area. We play, and kids and everybody. And that water generally is coming from springs on Cobb Mountain. There's some very, very large up at the headwaters. Demands upstream, residential and commercial uses at the headwaters. That's up at on Cobb Mountain. There's a big, golf course resort, summer cabins, a little commercial center. All of those rely on water from Kelsey Creek. Then you come on down, there are residential users along the creek, much closer to where we are. There are some ag users. There are a couple of vineyards upstream from us, that walnut orchard I pointed out, and cannabis. Okay, now we're getting to the heart of today. That's frost protection. First of all, groundwater pumping from Big Valley is done for two purposes, and this is in the ag sector. One is frost protection, which is this green band here, which starts in generally around mid-March, goes up through April and up into May for frost protection. It actually doesn't go all the way to June. It generally ends around May 15th. And we'll talk about that frost protection and what it consists of. Then irrigation runs from Memorial Day weekend, is the traditional one, as Sky commented, is through June, July, August, September, a little bit of October. That irrigation is largely for pear orchards and for vineyards for over that period of time. Frost protection has these attributes. First of all, it's essential for the production of fruit and garden crops in Big Valley. No frost protection, no vineyards, no pear orchards. It's as simple as that. Water is applied to the crops when the temperature during the nighttime temperature is likely to fall below 32 degrees. Below those temperatures, it does damage to the burns back grapevines, and you lose a crop. And I had that happen one year to me. Because it has a lot to do with the dew point. When the dew point is very, very low, meaning when it's very dry, you have to start water earlier than you do because the temperature drops when you start the water. The way frost protection works is it puts it in vineyards, it puts a little icy coating on the plant and the fruit, and as long as water keeps being added to it, the latent heat that is released when the water changes from liquid to solid form is released, and it maintains that ice at 32 degrees, which the plant can stand. Without added water constantly, if you had ice, well, it would drop to a lower temperature and burn back the leaves in the crop. The amount of water applied is from 4 to 10 hours a night, depending on the temperature. Sometimes you start at 10 o'clock in the night if it's a particularly serious dew point. So you have to get started earlier. Most nights, if the moisture is a little higher, you'd be starting around in 3 or 4 in the morning. The number of nights in a season typically range from none, which you'll see, to about 4. In earlier years, there were oft times when you'd have more than 4 nights in a season, but in the last few years, that's about it. The warming temperatures have made a difference. This climate change has reduced the number of cold nights. Groundwater is the principal source of the water for the frost protection, and ponds are used to supplement groundwater. We have little reservoirs typically because our pumps are designed and sized that they can, in a given vineyard of any size, they can produce enough water for irrigation of a part of the vineyard, but not the whole vineyard. So you have a reservoir with an additional pump, so you have the volume necessary for an entire vineyard. Okay, so let's see. Whoop. All right. We're going to have to flip around here, guys, because this is the crucial part. And hang with me, please.
Bethany does have a question. So Bethany?
Yes, can you just wait for me, Bethany? Just one moment here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Yes. Okay, I'll go back to this slide. Yes, please, Bethany, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm finding this very interesting. I'm just curious what this particular slide, where the information sources for this. Is this your personal, how you operate things, or what is it based on?
Oh, it's based, well, first of all, personal experience, but also in the case of our particular vineyards, we lease them currently to David Weiss, who's actually on some of our committees. David farms an enormous, I say enormous, he's probably farms more acreage of vineyards and in Big Valley than, well, not that, because I'm thinking of one huge vineyard, but anyway, he's a years and years and years of experience, and this is based on my 50 years of raising wine grapes. And it's what everybody has to do. I mean, you don't have any choice. This is the way. And I've served on the Wine Grape Commission. I don't know, attended courses. I've done many. I can't begin to tell you how many nights I have been up when the alarm went off because the temperature was falling to go start pumps. And enjoy the stars. They're really beautiful at that time of the night. Does that answer your question, Bethany?
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Peter, let's click on slide 10. Let's see if it can help you with the slide. Click on slide 10.
I have it now. It's going. Okay. All right. So what I have done, this is the spring of 2011. Okay. And this is the USGS gauge height or stage, that one. And this is the KCK gauge downstream. And I put them up to compare to each other. Also, you'll
Peter, yes. we're not seeing your screen. I think we're looking at a different screen.
Let's see. It says I'm screen sharing. Can you?
We're looking at the frost protection basics. That's the slide we currently see, which is slide 9.
All right. Let's see.
You probably shared a different presentation.
Okay, let me. I guess my suggestion would be if I stop sharing, come back, or yes, I did switch presentation. I backed it up to another hard drive, and I think I've now flipped.
Yeah, I would stop sharing, Peter, and then try resharing again with your new presentation.
Thank you. Let's do that. Okay.
Yes, we can see the USGS and Kelsey Creek gauge height, spring 2011.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So what I did is I went to spring of 2011 for the period of February 1st through January 30th for 2011, and downloaded the graph from the USGS gauge height graph. I did the same for the KCK gauge height graph, and stack them up so you can compare one to the other. And it's for the period of January 1st through June 30th of this year, of the year of spring 2011. I also post down here the Hitch run, the dates that Hitch were observed to run. And that's from the records of the Chi Council for that year, 2011. And I also posted the nights in which frost protection occurred, and that those nights are between, and it was a large number, it's 12 nights. And this is back in 2011, from April 8th to May 5th. And those, I can read to you 2011. There was the 8th to the 10th of April, the 12th to the 15th, the 25th to the 30th, and May 1st and 11. So the dates that I put in cover that entire period of time. These records were maintained by Don Eutner. Don farmed, his farm is right next to the, well, just slightly upstream by less than a quarter of a mile from the KCK gauge there on Kelsey Creek. Don farmed pears for 70 some years. He died here within the past year. He kept meticulous records in a little book that he carried around in his pocket. And I called his widow, Margaret, who I know well, and asked if she had any records of his that noted when he did frost protection. And she sent me this for the spring of 2011. That's 10 years ago. So there are a couple of things to note about this, and you'll see this repeated, in fact. The Hitch run was March 31st to April 5th, over a period of 6 days. The frost protection started April 8th through May 5th. In short, the frost protection occurred after the Hitch run. That's one thing to note. And you'll see that happen before too. And of course, one of the observations is the frost protecting can't have affected the Hitch run because the Hitch occurred first before it. But here's what I find most significant as well, or significant. When you compare the two graphs, this is the one upstream, USGS gauge, to the one downstream at the KCK gauge, there's no discernible difference. The slope, the peaks are the same as you see from the rainfall events. These are rainfall events that have occurred in which the water rises rapidly and then falls off quickly. And then here's the slope on down, which eventually results in it being dry in another month or so. Go to the next slide. Let's see. This is spring of 2018, more recently. Again, the USGS gauge height, the KCK gauge height, comparing the two graphs. There is, except for this tiny, there's a little tiny blip there that's not, I don't see it here, but the slopes are the same. Again, the Hitch run was in March 28th to April 1st. Each of those nights for 4 days is a very short run. That's all there was. And by the way, these hitch are counted at the detention structure. I didn't mention that. That's where this they always go up and down at the detention structure because they says my internet's okay. Frost protection occurred April 17th to the 19th, and again on the 30th as a total of 4 nights. So if you think of it in terms of nights, if you take an average of length of time, that would be for 4 nights for doing frost protection, about 32 hours. You say an average of 8, which is generous. I mean, 32 hours out of the entire season that water was pumped from the groundwater. And let me just emphasize that. It's not being pumped from the creek. It's being pumped from the groundwater, from wells. That 32 hours in the whole season that water was pumped for frost protection.
Hey, Peter, Bethany
Yes.
has another question for you.
Yes, Bethany.
Yeah, so this is all really important and good information. I just want to say that I've done the type of analysis looking at frost protection and related depletion in streams. And as we talked about during the last meeting, really the way that you answer this question is by looking at the pumps that are being used for frost protection and then measuring potentially any change in water surface elevation at that location. And normally it's really about those 48 hours or whatever that they're doing it for, that fish are getting stranded in those locations, or the eggs are being dewatered at those locations. So to me, it would be really difficult to see any of this by looking at the USGS gauge upstream versus the Kelsey Creek, the gauge downstream to really see what's going on here.
Let me comment on that, Bethany. First of all, this is what's going on downstream is the KCK gauge. I just simply point out that between the two, there's no indication that the water at the KCK gauge has dropped significantly. In other words, if the pumping for frost protection were significant, you should see a drop off in the flow at this KCK gauge. You don't see it.
I don't think that that's a true thing to say. I think that what you would expect to see as a frost protection impact is a lowering of the water surface where the pumping is happening. I wouldn't expect to see a lowering of the entire, I wouldn't expect to see the signature of that downstream at the KCK gauge. And you'd want to see Hitch at that location where you're doing the groundwater extraction for the frost protection, and you'd want to measure a water surface elevation change, because it's not impacting, it's a momentary impact, and it matters how close the pump is to the stream for frost protection.
Well, I think you're referring principally to those kinds of places where the pumps are close to the streams for the purpose of taking advantage of the water in the stream. That's not the case here. That's not the case in this instance, nor is it the case generally in terms of here on Kelsey Creek. In other words, this water is being, all the water along with, I think maybe one exception way downstream, water is being pumped from wells that are far below the level of the, pumping from far below the level of the creek flow itself. These are not flows from the creek. And furthermore, the water is of such a volume, you're not going to see a depression in the water flow no matter what. And in fact, even pumping directly from the creek, as I did for many years, there's no discernible difference at all. I mean, the volume of water that's going by is far in excess of any water that's being pumped, certainly for the frost protection we were doing. But it's it doesn't make sense to me that you're going to see a depression in a flow of water in a stream that is boiling down a creek just because you have a pump nearby pumping, which is not, these pumps aren't directly related to the creek itself.
Hey, Peter, just want to do a quick time check. You have about maybe 7 minutes to wrap up, and then we can proceed to Sarah's presentation and leave about 10 minutes for public discussion towards the end.
Perfect. That will be just fine. Spring of 2019. This was, again, the same idea, comparing these two graphs. There's no discernible difference in the slope of the flow coming down from the USGS gauge or that's going or at the KC gauge. The Hitch run covered a period of 12 days. There was one night of frost protection, and that actually occurred after the Hitch had run. In other words, the Hitch run was in April up to the 24th. The frost protection was one night on April 30th. 2019, 2020, we're very close here. The 2020 is again, same pattern where we have, this is the pattern of upstream, this is the pattern of the downstream gauge. Hitch run from the 13th to the 18th, just 5 days, that's all. Frost protection, in this case, the frost and the Hitch run did overlap. Frost protection was May 31st to April 14th, May 3rd to the 4th. So for these two nights, 31st and the 14th, it overlapped the Hitch run. After that, the next Hitch frost protection occurred 2 weeks later, between the 18th and May 3rd. My conclusion, first on these maps, for those 3 years, 11, 18, and 19, the groundwater pumping occurred after the Hitch runs were completed. So, you know, where's the effect? For the year 2020, Hitch spawning run and groundwater pumping overlapped. And that is typical, by the way, that the Hitch runs were completed before the frost protection. And then finally, I would suggest the data would lead one to the conclusion that groundwater pumping for frost protection in Big Valley does not reduce stream flow in Kelsey Creek during the Hitch spawning runs. I see no evidence to support that. None, no data, nothing. If there is data, I'm happy to review it, but so far there's been none. One last thing, skipping to Adobe Creek very quickly, an important observation. It says since 2014, I'm sorry, that should be 2004, not 14, when we started our observations. In other words, for the last, what is that, 16, 17 years, Adobe Creek has never failed to have its spawning run, unlike all other tributaries to Clear Lake. Every year, Chi Council monitors have observed Hitch in Adobe Creek, and the numbers have been substantial. It's unlike any other creek around Clear Lake. Kelsey Creek, interesting to note, I was reading Fish and Game Bulletin, said in 1940, let's see, 42 and 43, no Hitch ran. In those years, no Hitch ran up Kelsey Creek. Why, I don't know. The biologists didn't know either, but observed. What differentiates Adobe Creek from other streams is the two reservoirs upstream, Highland Springs and Adobe Creek. No other streams have reservoirs. How the reservoirs affect Adobe Creek to make it consistently attractive to Hitch is not known. But Adobe Creek is unique. It's not like any other creek in tributary to Clear Lake. That's it, folks. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. At this moment, we can go ahead and hand it over to Sarah Ryan, and we can continue any questions or comments towards the end.
If I could make a comment for a moment or two.
Go for it, Sky.
Okay. Just to back up Peter's comments about the importance of frost protection in Big Valley. For those of you who may not know, I grew local food crops in Big Valley from 1992 through 2015. I produced more than $1 million worth of local food from my farm here. So while that's not large, it's not insignificant either. And I want to say in very clear terms that I could not have done that without frost protection. And if we want to build, I know a lot of people want to be critical of vineyards and the monocrop thing we're going to. If we want a local food system that doesn't rely extensively on fossil fuel transportation of food, and we want to produce more things in Big Valley to feed Big Valley residents and Lake County residents, we have to have frost protection. And with the tools that we have now, there's no way around that. Now, people think greenhouses. I grew in greenhouses, unheated greenhouses. I put thermostatic frost protection inside those greenhouses as well. So I just want to reiterate how important the access to frost protection is for all kinds of farmers and for the future of Lake County agriculture. I can't say it strongly enough. There's members of the public who just want to say, they don't need to frost protect. Well, they just don't get it, or they have a vision of the world that's all about shopping at Costco and Safeway and it all coming from somewhere else. So that's my point. It's just so important, frost protection. We need to look, if the only option here is to restrict frost protection to protect the hitch, we need to look at any and all alternatives to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So at this moment, we'll go ahead and hand it over to Sarah Ryan.
Thank you. There's actually going to be, there's a slideshow that Bethany is going to pull up. So if you can give her privileges for that, that would be great. So and Bethany, you're on probably slide 3 or something. There you go. So hi, everybody. I'm the environmental director for the Big Valley Band of Palma Indians. I'm Sarah Ryan. And I actually have with me a couple of people. One is our Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Ron Montez, who is not only a Big Valley elder, but as I mentioned, our TIPO, very active and knowledgeable about the resources of the tribe and the history of the tribe. So he'll be speaking in just a moment. And then it will be followed up by some information about our studies. Just a short, we don't have a lot of time, so we just really have a few slides on it. This is all data that has been provided to the county for the purposes of developing a sustainable groundwater plan, groundwater management plan. But I do want to say that the tribes have been, in terms of scientific studies on the Clear Lake Hitch, have spent more than a couple of decades, but certainly since 2000, have been monitoring the creeks of the Big Valley area and actually all around the county. And we're doing that by looking at the water chemistry in multiple locations on each creek. We're also doing our own hitch observations. We don't share all of that data with the Chi Council, mainly because, we have our own programs and, we want to make sure that we're tracking things appropriately. But we are looking at not only water chemistry, but we've also done pesticide studies in the creeks. That data has been shared with agencies, and we are looking at velocity in many of the creeks, as well as some more recent equipment that Bethany is going to talk about. Our pressure transducers that we've put into Adobe Creek and in multiple locations, and also in we will be moving into Kelsey Creek for that as well. We are looking at these things because of the importance of the Clear Lake Hitch for the tribes and for the whole community. Our tribal members, and Ron will get into this, but our tribal members really place a huge importance on the Clear Lake Hitch. And we know, because we've rescued many a hitch, that the creeks go dry before the hitch can make it back to the lake. We have participated in hitch rescues with Fish and Wildlife. We have, I know Robinson Rancheria has done that as well, and they've actually rescued many of them and put them into a nursery. And what we've noticed looking at water rights information from the eRIMS program and the State Water Resources Control Board, and looking at the wells that are in along Kelsey and Adobe Creek. So we have all of the well completion reports from the Department of Water Resources. We have a lot of data that is coming from the state that's been collected over the years about the water demand in the area. And the presentation you just heard, which is really seems to be minimizing the impact that agriculture is having on the creeks, is something that we don't completely agree with. And we are providing, the tribe is interested in accumulating the information and continuing to fight for the Hitch to ensure that they are here for future generations. So with that being said, I'd like to pass it on to Ron Montez Sr., our Big Valley elder and Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, to give his perspective on the Clear Lake Hitch, its importance, and anything else that he'd like to talk about regarding that. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. My name is Ron Montez. I'm 71, almost 72 years old. I was raised in the Elam Rancheria. I was born in Colusa, and my mother married a man from there, but we lived in Big Valley since I was about 4 years old. And this is where my mother and her family was from, were born here and was raised. And so this area has been my home for many years. And historically, I don't have all the research information and the data. All I have is the knowledge that we don't have is the Hitch like we had. And the Hitch, or the chai that we call it, was more than just something that we would consider as more of a social type of thing. It was a life support. We would go out and gather as many hitch as we could. As long as they were running, we were gathering, and we would clean them and we would hang them to dry, and they would be our food source for the remainder of the year. In those days, Native Americans could not find work as they can today. There was a bunch of people's attitudes, and people would look down upon the Indians as a lesser person. And it went through the school systems, the legal systems, the law systems, and every system that's around here. And we had to put up with that. I got chased home from walking back from the nearest town in Clear Lake Oaks one day from a bunch of young white boys who are football players. They were looking to introduce me to their fists. And so there was a bunch of prejudice and a lot of things happening. But these, the fish that we are concerned about today is because that was such an important part of our daily life. And even looking into our ancestors, their daily ration of food was a piece of this fish and some acorn mush and acorn bread. That was every day, most of the times 3 times a day. And so that fish was very much of our culture, part of who we are. And to see it disappear each year and each year, and not knowing why. And then we hear that there's so many different chemicals in the water, that there's more vineyards and more other agricultural things that's sucking the water out. And then there's Yolo County that's wanting their water. And all the time it's affecting our tribes in more ways than just Hitch. It's with our birds and our fish out of the lakes, and also our tules and our shrubs and things that are around the water lines and the shores, the clams and the crayfish and the things. And so the Hitch, again, is something that I was concerned about, because I remember those days when, as soon as we heard the Hitch was starting to run, everyone would just jump in their cars and just take off as fast as they could, throwing in a bunch of buckets or bags or sacks or anything. And the whole rancheria would take off, and we'd go out there and would just we'd see a bunch of other people, white people, different ones didn't know, they're just killing the fish. They have no concern for them, and we were out there trying to catch as many as we could in sacks, and we throw it in the back of the truck and come back to the rancheria and clean them, and others would be out kicking, grabbing them. So it was something that was more than just an occasional thing. We looked so much forward to this that it was like, okay, the day has finally come, they're here, and it just caused so much excitement in the people. And we would go all out to try and catch as many of these we can, and we ate them all year. As a kid, I used to tear off a piece of this and just chew it as I was outside playing, like a piece of jerky. We'd throw some to our dogs, and we'd share them with everyone else that didn't have any. It was a real, you feel like when you have food, you feel, okay, I'm good now. I can relax a little bit and kick back, don't have to worry so much. And so that provided that feeling, that sense to us as Indian people around here. And nowadays, most of the kids don't even know when the hitch run. They don't go out and gather them. There's a whole 2 generations who have missed out on it because the amount and the numbers of them have so decreased and fallen off that it is, by the time we hear of it, they're gone. And it's, people used to come from all over when the hitch were running, not just here in Big Valley. They'd come over from Sonoma and Mendocino counties, from the valleys over in Sacramento, and the Wintun people would come, the Patwin people would come, they'd all come, and they'd all gather this. So it's not just an isolated Pomo group around here. It was for the natives all over the place kind of knew when that was going to happen, and they came and camped along the banks of the Kelsey Creek and Adobe Creek. And it was a huge gathering. It was very important to our people. And to see what is there now is really disheartening. I haven't even eaten any hitch for at least 10 years. And it's hard to even find any of our basic food sources anymore. Mud hen and different things, because of there's so much pollution, so much just taking of the things that provide for their health and their welfare away, that it affects me personally in my heart and in my mind. I can recollect those days, and I can tell the younger people about it, but they'll never experience it. And that's a tragic loss for us as people who've been here more than 15,000 years. We had it managed fine. We took care of everything. We never had a time when we were without, until we had other people come in and take control and manage and do all these other things to it. And now we are still, no one cares about us. No one thinks about the Indians. No one thinks about how we rely on anything. They're arguing out there over money, over to make, provide food, which is a good thing, but it's still a whole community, not just our community. It's all of our communities, our native people around this area and outside of this area. They all know the story. They've all been here. They've all tasted of that. And now it's pretty much gone. And so whatever we can do to support this important food source for us, I would more than happy to say anything from my past that I can recollect and support. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I do want to make a quick time check. You guys have about 7 more minutes for your presentation.
All right, thank you. We will move into the slides from Bethany. Thank you, Ron, for being available to let people know how it is
Yes, thanks, Ron. That was some deep, heavy stuff. So let me get into I just wanted to talk about some of the recent studies completed by Flow West, my colleagues over here with Sarah. And these are just the recent studies because Sarah went over several of them. But basically, we've completed a Clear Lake water quality data visualization project in 2016. Adobe Creek stage gauges were installed in 2018. Kelsey Creek Fish Passage project in 2019. So we're trying to fix that issue downstream of Main Street Bridge to the passage barrier there. And the Adobe Creek climate adaptation plan is the most recent thing that we're talking about that we've completed. And we also have several upcoming and ongoing studies. We're currently looking at groundwater, surface water relationships in Kelsey Creek, and we're currently developing a technical memo of the findings. Installation of pressure transducers at multiple near creek well locations to get 15-minute well data consecutive with our transducer data. Collection of new LiDAR along Adobe Creek to capture the bathymetry, because the FEMA LiDAR the creek was wet during that time, so we'd like to improve that. Development, so then we're going to develop a 2D model along the Adobe Creek to look at Hitch habitat suitability with respect to velocity and depth. And we're looking to also put in a grant proposal for Highland Springs reservoir conjunctive use, and that will expand upon that 2D model. So I just want to get into the climate adaptation plan aspects of that, because that's the most recent thing that we've done. So as I talked about during our last meeting, we developed a synthetic flow hydrograph for Adobe Creek based on Kelsey Creek relationships with the overlapping period of record at the USGS gauges, and that's documented in this report. We've installed 3 pressure transducers. We developed a 1D hydraulic model on Adobe Creek, and we looked at agricultural water demand using the CUP Plus model, and we developed recommendations for groundwater and surface water management to benefit the Hitch. So this graphic is something that we've used a lot to show the overlap between the different types of irrigation and frost protection that occur during the times when Hitch have been observed in the tributaries and along with their historical migration period. And we've got several citations for this. This is a little bit different than what Peter was showing before. So, so we have different sources of data. And then on the left here, we have February through June mean flows in Adobe Creek based on this, both the data that was available and the synthetic hydrographs that we developed. And so this is what we used for our model. And so here on the right, you will see the extent of our 1D model on Adobe Creek, and those numbers are the different crossings along Adobe Creek. And we got the suitability criteria for the Clear Lake Hitch based on some local information, although there haven't been official, I don't think, designations of what these are, but this is the best available information that we have. But the velocity less than 5 CFS, the depth greater than ½ a foot, and then we use CDFW guidelines to get these flows at which the lower passage flow and the upper passage flow, which means these are the limits under which you should have passage throughout your creek for anadromous fish. So 1 CFS to 168 CFS from that. So I just wanted to go over the results of our model, and this is just a quick way to show that. So this is a graph that shows it's either green for suitable and red for not suitable. And each of these individual pieces is a different flow. So this is the 90%, so that's 100, or that was the 1 CFS flow. And as you can see, most of the creek is not passable at 1 CFS. The depth is too shallow. And then the 5% is 168. And so at 168, most of the creek, it looks like it's passable. The Hitch can get all the way up to the confluence between with Highland Springs. And so what we found with this is that based on mean monthly flow basis, which is just a simplification of what's going on, we saw that some parts of the creek might be becoming non-passable in between, what is this, Highway 29 Argonaut Road and this, oh gosh, I forget what this crossing is called, Bell Hill. So starting in April, you know, the amount of creek available to the Hitch is potentially becoming limited. And into May, it becomes even more limited, to where potentially only, you know, this is where Hitch would get stranded. This is the problem with what Sarah was talking about with the rescuing, is that if parts of the creek become impassable, then whatever Hitch migrated up to this part, somewhere between April and May, they might get stranded and not be able to make it back down to Clear Lake. Let me get into the water demand. So we also looked at this so-called CUP Plus model, which is the DWR Consumptive Use Program Plus. And we looked at results from 2014 to 2019, and basically what we found was that there was an increase in water demand, and distinguished them out between wine grapes, pears, and walnuts. These are the increases between those years. And so that was an interesting finding, and I'm not sure if that coincides. I need to look at what the report found that we're working on now. So, and I think really that's all I wanted to go over. So yeah, it looks like we have some questions potentially.
Brenna?
Hi, Bethany. Thank you so much for your presentation. I did have a few questions. One is just a quick clarification on the results on this slide. Do you know if this was relative water use? Was this based on acreage? Was this water use per acreage? Do you know how that all broke down? I mean, how am I trying to ask this? Is this based on relative water use irregardless of acreage, or does this take acreage increase or decrease into account over the basin?
Yeah, so this takes acreage into account. So we use the ag lands. I didn't do this analysis, but I can provide more details in it if we need to. But my understanding is that we use the ag data available, and we input that into the CUP Plus model. So that takes into account soil type and temperature and all of these things, along with the amount of different crop types that are available. So that's my understanding.
Okay. Is that available just to review to see how that was calculated? I mean, the other, I guess I'm interested specifically in the increase in pear water use demand. There was a decrease in pear acreage. So if it's independent of acreage changes, that makes more sense to me.
Okay. Yeah, it could have to do with changes in climate as well. Yeah, I don't have a problem with sharing that. Sarah, We can share that, can't we?
Yeah, we've already, and this is from the technical memo that was shared not only with the county, but I think also with the Hitch conservation strategy. So
okay,
happy to send that out. Yeah, no problem.
okay, thank you for that. Just another quick question, because we did have discrepancies between the two presentations on irrigation timing, specifically in wine grapes. Bethany, do you mind just going back to that slide with the sources? I'm just curious on what data sets were used for that. What data sets specifically for the ag irrigation did you use?
For the wine grape and pear irrigation, it looks like it's this ucanr.edu site garden web.
Okay.
So this is also provided in that tech memo. So if you want to dig into the details of that.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
So there's no more questions on here, but I want to take a moment and see if Sky has any questions. Sky, floor is yours if you have questions.
Nothing at this time.
I have a question for Sky.
Go for it, Sarah.
Yeah.
So, hey, Sky, what was the frost protection that everybody in the county used to use before they were using water?
Well, I don't know that everybody used anything before, but that'd be before my time. But other people use wind machines.
Okay.
And then in recent times, people like to use row covers. You know, that'd be like a small farm kind of option. And again, the hoop houses, like I say, it's just that, you know, to grow the diversity of crops you need and to deal with the widely swinging temperatures and now more the lower humidities, it just requires, I mean, you know, water is a critical part of it. Now, there may be a new technology coming that'll really change that. But at this point now, I mean, I just couldn't have done it. No way. Not even close.
Do you know why they moved from the wind machines?
There's, you know, is David on the call?
Yes.
I don't have any personal experience with wind machines, but I know that there are, you know, there's certain events where they don't work. They're based on the wind machine concept is that there's warmer air aloft and, you know, higher up because, you know, the cold air settles because it's literally denser and heavier. You turn on the wind machine, it exhausts the air at the soil surface. And because there's like a vacuum created, then warmer air from up above comes down and fills that in. Now, you know, and it's just, I think there's a lot of times when wind machines just can't really do it. They just can't get enough frost protection. And there's an academic term for that, the kind of frost event that is, where the air above is not adequately warm. So it's kind of dicey. Anyway, but yeah, so that's another way to do it. But I don't know. There's not many people who, you know, are still putting in wind machines. So but like I said, I don't have personal experience with wind machines.
Peter, you have a question or comment?
I think David has an answer to that question, and I'll defer to him.
David?
Yes, so we use wind machines and sprinklers, and depending on the location and the crop. But as Sky pointed out, the theory that makes wind machines practical is when you have an inversion and there's warmer air above that you stir up with wind machines to mix with the colder air down below. Years ago, smudge pots, you know, orchard heaters, these things that people now put in their gardens, we used to have those around the perimeters of orchards more than vineyards. And those would burn diesel. And so the smudge pots, they would create an updraft from the heat that they would generate. And then wind machines out in the middle of the orchard would be stirring up the air. So you'd get this sort of this suction along the bottom along the orchard floor that would be, the cold air would get pulled up by the heat from the smudge pots, and then you would have mixing going on up above with the wind machines that would, you know, be blowing that warm air back down. So that was very effective, and really that almost, I've been here 28 years, and only for about 4 or 5 of those years did we continue using smudge pots in any kind of significant way. But I mean, the smudge pot thing is obviously an environmental issue, because the smoke and the spillage and the risk of, you know, it's dangerous for people to be handling them and lighting them. And so anyway, I don't know anyone who's using them anymore anywhere. Wind machines tend to work better in pairs than they do in grapes. And that's typically because the plant tissue in grapes is more susceptible, more tender than the pear tissue is. And so vineyards that are frost protected are almost all done so with water. And Peter did a good job of explaining the theory there, that the water creates a shield of ice, and the constant change from liquid to solid releases, that is water, it releases the latent heat, and it helps to protect the whole crop. So that's generally why water is more prominent in vineyards than is wind. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Sarah, did you have another question? Your hand is still up.
Nope, I'm putting my hand down.
Peter, did you have any follow-up questions or comments? I know your hand was up earlier. You are.
Oh, my hand popped up in response to Sarah's question, and I was thrilled to defer to the expert on the subject. So anyway, David did a great job. So no, I don't have any further questions.
David, your hand is still up. Do you have a question or comment for anyone in the group? Nope. So in that case, there's no more comments or questions. I believe there's no more GDE calls. Is that correct, Ibrahim, Eddie?
I think we probably will have some at some point, but I guess I have a question on this frost protection, because one of the things that we have to do in our model is we need to incorporate frost protection. And so, you know, down in Napa, there had been some surveys done, sort of, you know, they had surveyed various ag interests to figure out, you know, who's doing frost protection, who's not. And there'd been some estimates on what those amounts were, but also the temperature threshold of when that would happen. So I think there's probably going to have to be some follow-up discussions on trying to figure out, you know, I get some agreement on, you know, the timing or yeah, because it seems like there's some differences in opinion on how that's done. So we gotta somehow ground truth that. So I'm not sure how to do it yet, but that would be something that will need some help from some of you all on at some point. So we'll put some exhibits together, and maybe we can have another conversation about it. So.
It is 4:31. We can stay for a couple more minutes if there's more comments or questions. I do see Sarah has her hand up. Sarah.
Yeah, just a quick one based on what Eddie just said, that, you know, I hope that we have the ability to look at the frost protection usage that's happening throughout the whole of Big Valley, and not just 1 or 2 areas. Because you know, from what I understand and what I've seen, there's a lot of variability in the climate within the Big Valley area.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to look at sort of see where we can get temperature information, and then somehow factor that into it. I'm not sure how we'll do it, but we have to come up with a way to look at it. So, and it will vary spatially. Yeah.
David?
So, I'm sorry. Go ahead, David.
Well, go ahead, Sky, because my hand's up and they still know it. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say in terms of climate change, what's happening in Lake County is we're seeing, in my opinion, and I don't think anyone will disagree with me here, the farmers, that we're seeing much lower humidities than we used to see. And what we're seeing now, in fact, I'm on a campaign now to quit using the term frost protection, because that implies there's visible white frost. And when there's low humidities, there's no visible white frost. And so I think it's better to talk now, change the term to freeze protection. And actually, when we talk about a freeze night or a freeze morning, we should say temperature along with the relative humidity at that time. And it's super important to get this. That, I mean, all that stuff they said about the latent heat of water and all that's true, but the ice on the leaf is actually an insulator. And so without the ice on there, when there's so I would call a dry frost event, you know, the potential for crop injury is so much higher. The coastal regions, Sonoma and Napa, almost never have this thing. It used to be a relatively rare thing in Lake County. It happened a number of times. In fact, one bad frost year, I noticed that many times the night began, and I was up like Peter walking the field. We would start the night in a dry frost event, and we would end the night after it got very, very cold, and then we'd have visible white frost. So if somebody got up in the morning, went outside, they'd still see visible white frost. But we might have had 4 or 5 hours of dry frost conditions. And when you have that, all you see is crop damage. So, I mean, this is a special Lake County deal. Frost is much more difficult here than it is in Napa or in Sonoma. And I'm pretty sure David will agree with me on that. So take it from there, David.
So that's exactly what I was going to point out. I think, you know, the data from Napa and Sonoma may be relevant, but it's not truly indicative of the conditions here. And even within the big valley, Sarah was asking about kind of the whole valley. And even within the valley, there are areas that are much more prone to frost. They get colder earlier. I mean, when we get up for frost, we have either employees living in colder areas or sensors, alarms in colder areas that go off and get us up and looking at things, but we don't turn the whole valley on at the same time. And in fact, we may just start certain places, and the rest we just watch and monitor as the night goes on, and we may or may not, you know, do more. But it's very much a night to night type of thing, and to try to model it, I think, is going to be challenging. But I agree also with what Skye said, that it's not just the temperature on the thermometer that we're worried about. It's how dry the air is, because the first water that you turn on when the air is really dry, it evaporates and actually further cools the tissue and the environment in which it's being pumped into. So all of that goes into the calculation of when to start and then also when to stop. So it's pretty complicated. And, you know, I'm just a farmer, but I've been to classes and listened to, you know, I forget, climatologist type guy from UC Davis is quite up on this stuff, and I can't think of his name offhand, but there may be models that are already out there too, Eddie, that we could, you know, benefit from. I don't know, but anyway, I'm happy to participate and help sort that out.
Yeah, no, and this is really, really important, because I think we're trying to, you know, you guys are probably getting sick of me hearing this, but we've got this compressed schedule. And so this is a topic that, you know, took 8 months in Napa, and we're trying to address it in a month. So we've got to come up with some compromise, some approach that everybody feels comfortable with now. And then, you know, we can address that, you know, and fill in the data gaps at a later date. But it's something that we're gonna tackle this month. So you'll hear more from us on that. So, but we do really appreciate the information on all of this. And so I think with that, I'll put myself on mute. Thanks.
So before we wrap up, we did have one last comment from Sarah.
Yeah, I was just hoping that, you know, between like the Wine Grape Commission and, you know, maybe the Farm Bureau and the Ag Extension, that, you know, there would be more records on when frost was actually happening on local farms. And I mean, if I was in one of those, I would be really interested in keeping that data. And it's, you know, maybe we can start this year or this coming season, because it seems, you know, because of that variability in microclimate within Big Valley, that and the fact that, as David was saying, that, you know, some areas are more prone to frost. I mean, I've always heard that too. And so they might be starting earlier. And so that's why it's really important that if you're looking at, you know, general kind of timelines of things, that it's not just one location, but you're actually looking at multiple locations and you're averaging it, or taking the one that's most extreme or least extreme. But, you know, we've got to understand that, you know, there's a bunch of data that's out there, and I really wish it was being collected by somebody within agriculture, but I don't think it is. So maybe we can start with this coming year.
Actually, it is. The Western Weather Group, there are climatologists or our weather people from Chico, and they're contracted to provide an agricultural weather forecast, and they have extensive amounts of data on all that kind of stuff from many stations. I was on the advisory committee for, I don't know, many years. I don't know, David, are you still on the advisory committee?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a phenomenal amount of data there. I don't, you know, what you want to make out of it, but, you know, they got highs and lows and relative humidities and, you know, minimums and maximums, and then there's 3 months of actual specific frost forecasts that are put out in the afternoon for that particular morning. Lake County, again, is way ahead of everybody else on this, and primarily because Napa and Sonoma don't need it. We've been struggling with frost here forever. I mean, so it's a special case here. There is a tremendous amount of data, and the ag industry has been doing it. So maybe David can follow up on that.
Then why isn't that used as a source then in discussing frost protection times?
So it's weather data, and it's not actual how many gallons per minute or.
No, obviously, yeah.
I think Don Utner was probably one of the very few people that ever kept records like that. I mean, farmers, I don't know, I shouldn't generalize, but I think it's rare for that kind of record to have been kept. And I don't know of any other than Don Utner.
Yeah, so maybe we can, you know, we can get some agency help in collecting it, so we really see, you know, what the frost protection needs are throughout the Big Valley area as we move forward, because it's obviously a big consideration.
Yeah, I don't know that you'd get much buy-in from the ag community on that one, Sarah.
No, probably not, but we have observers.
Right. No, I know.
Great. So it doesn't appear to be any more comments or questions. We'll go ahead and wrap up this call for today. And from what it sounds like, it seems like the technical team will be following up on other future potential GDE meetings. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining this afternoon, and be on the lookout for that potential future email for the next GDE meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.